Are we ready? Yes. So if you've got Chumash, it's easier to follow. Now, Toldos is, of course, a very critical juncture in Torah, because this is where we're going to be introduced to Yaakov and Esav, but Yaakov is going to eventually get the name Yisrael. So these coming sedras now are going to be very central, because we were told, the medrash right at the beginning of, Rashi brought it right on the first pasuk, first verse of the Torah, Bereshis, and the very first verse means, it's a difficult word to translate. Rashi says grammatically it's problematic, because it should translate in the beginning of, and it doesn't tell us that in the beginning of what? In the beginning of God created heaven and earth. Beginning of what? So the Ramban says you could read it differently, but Rashi says no, you read it Bereshis, within a framework of this thing called Reshis, that which is primary. And he then brings the midrashic verses of Yisrael is called Reshis, Torah is called Reshis. So this vision of a relationship within humanity, this entity called Yisrael that has to land, eventually the whole world has to be called Yisrael. There's going to be a state called Yisrael, you can have here, take this one, just go here. And a thing called Torah. So this is all happening now. This is going to be the question of who's going to get Yisrael, who's going to become this. It's going to be this week's Sedra Toldos. So let's give a very brief overview just to put things into perspective. The opening scene is the children, right? They told us, in fact, the opening verse is Eila Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham. It's chapter 25, Chof Hey, verse Pasuk Yud Tes, verse 19. In Art Scroll, it's page 124. Ve'eila Toldos Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham hoilidus Yitzchak. These are the products or offspring of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. Now, before you move anywhere, that pasuk's going to jump at us. Like there's a redundancy built right in there. This is the children of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Of course, Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. Okay, and Rashi will deal with that and so on. Then we discuss how there was a lot of tefillah, a lot of davening before Rivka actually had the children. And then she has pain in the pregnancy, and she goes to ask God, which means she goes to ask, normally understood, she went to Shem, to Ava, to one of the Nevi'im, one of the prophets around, to ask what is going on. And she gets this message that she has two nations within her womb. This is not just two ordinary people. She's not just feeling, first of all, twins explains a little bit of the physical pain, but much more than that. There is a historic battle happening within her that one will rise above the other, and eventually the younger will win out. But this is, in other words, there's a cosmic significance to your pregnancy, and there's a cosmic struggle that will emerge. That's the news she gets. And then we move straight on to they're born and they kind of separate directions, right? Pasuk Chav Zayin 27, page 126 in the Art Scroll. They grow up. Esav becomes the hunter. Yaakov is a simple man who lives in tents. Okay? And typically when we talk about people living in tents, we mean people who are either becoming spiritual, studying God, or studying how to serve God. And then comes this moment where, for some reason, it's not given to us explicitly in the psukim in the verses here. Yaakov is making some kind of stew or whatever exactly it is. The Gemara actually suggests this is the day Avraham Avinu died, and there was an act of mourning, which Chazal bring down. Okay, and Esav comes in and says, "I'm tired. I just want to eat this thing. Pour this down me, this red stuff." And Yaakov says, "Well, let's do an exchange for the birthright." And Esav gives the birthright. Now, it's not clear at this stage what birthright incorporates. As the Rambam points out, later in the Torah, birthright incorporates a double possession of the land. But in this particular case, it may not even have been the rule. There's something called bechorah, something called that firstborn position that Esav has traded away. Very possibly, it actually is a position of some kind of responsibility or some kind of spiritual role or something, but likely a responsibility in seeing through the next generation. And Yaakov's taken that role. Esav despises it. It says at the end, you got this powerful string of verbs in Pasuk Lamed Daled 34, page 128. Yaakov gives Esav the bread and the lentils, and he ate, and he drank, and he got up, and he went, and he despised the birthright. There's like no conversation, there's no nothing, just he doesn't want this. That's it. Okay, then we interrupt the story, and we go to what seems to play very limited narrative role, and we discover that Yitzchak has this whole episode of replaying many of the things his father did. There's a famine in the land. It even says explicitly, apart from the famine that was in the days of Avraham, right? And Yitzchak goes to Avimelech, king of Plishtim. Well, that's exactly where he went to, where his father went to, after his father went to Egypt. Oh, but God appears, says, don't go to Egypt, stay here. And more or less the same, and literally says, I'll apply, everything's about Avraham in this, if you look carefully over here. I'll establish the covenant, the promise that I promised to Avraham your father, etc., etc. You get the same thing, that through you will be blessed all the nations of earth. That's always the key to the covenant, by the way. That through you will be blessed all the families of earth. Okay, you're going to get the same one. Because Avraham listened to my voice. Pasuk case. It's like Yitzchak, it's very interesting. His entire life is just Avraham, Avraham, Avraham. Everything is about Avraham. And he lives in Gra. And of course he does exactly the same thing as Avraham did. When he arrives in a strange place, he says about his wife, she's my sister. He's afraid someone will otherwise want to abduct her and get rid of him. And this time Avimelech doesn't fall for the trick. Nobody touches her. Eventually spies and notices that they are behaving like husband and wife, not like brother and sister. And he calls to Yitzchak. He says, this was nearly a disaster. What have you done? And then Yitzchak starts digging wells. He plants crops and he digs wells. He gets all these things. Hashem makes him very successful. And he starts digging the wells. But what wells? So on page 130, on Perek Vav, chapter 26, Pasuk Tesvav, verse 15. All the wells that his father's servants had dug in the days of Avraham, his father, the Philistines, the Pelishtim, had filled them in, right? And filled them with earth. Why did they do that, by the way? So there might be very, very deep levels. In fact, the Ramban actually says this entire episode doesn't really have an easy explanation on the pshat, on the natural thematic explanation of the text. You have to go much deeper. But the nearest we could probably come up with is, first of all, these were often business rivals. Right? If you dug a well, there were two potential problems. If I own a well near you, I've just taken away your income. Because wells were major sources of income, right? There'd be, people would travel there, people would trade goods there, and so on. You'd exchange for water, whatever it would be. But also for Avraham, that was important because he wanted people to travel so he could spread the good word, what life's about, chesed, kindness, emunah, faith in God. But that's one issue they may have filled in. And also, just sometimes if you dig a well here, the water flow's interrupted. Okay, but for whatever reason, or perhaps they were just jealous, or whatever it was, they want to control, they were filling in all the wells that Avraham had dug. And Yitzchak starts unfilling them. And he digs and eventually, to avoid problems, he digs another well, and they fill that, and they quarrel over that one. It's actually called, it ends up being called Esek, like a struggle, and then he does another one, and they end up calling it Sitna, opposition, and then finally he gets the real last well of Rehovos, like he's allowed to have expense, really is when Avimelech himself comes and renews the covenant that he had with Avraham, right? That's already on the next page over here. Well, again, Hashem appears in Pasuk Chavdalet. He appears to him and says, I'm Hashem, God of Avraham, your father. Don't worry, I'll be with you. I'll give you the brachos that I gave to Avraham. He builds a tent. He starts digging another well. And Avimelech now comes and starts proposing a covenant. He says, why have you come? Yitzchak says, you've been my opposition. You've hated me. And he says, yeah, but I see Hashem's with you, and I want to make also basically the same covenant that we made with your father, right? Let's make another one again. And not only did they make a covenant, they renamed the place Beersheba, just like Avraham Avinu did. And so this entire episode seems to just be that Yitzchak's life is nothing but a replica of Avraham's. Okay? Then we get back to the story of Yaakov and Esav. Now, Esav's 40 years old, he gets married, Yitzchak's getting old, his eyes are dimming, and he decides he wants to pass the brachos on. Every generation they pass the blessing on, he's got to pass it on. And he says to Esav, he loved Esav. We said already earlier, the Torah told us that he loved Esav because Esav hunted with the mouth, which is an ambiguous phrase. It could either mean he filled his mouth with hunted food. In other words, he always cared for his father physically and looked after him. Or it could mean he trapped him with his mouth. And the medrash brings that he would pretend to be somebody he wasn't. Either way, and Rivka, however, says Yaakov. Rivka loves Yaakov. So here he says, look, I'm getting old. I don't know when I'm going to die. Go and hunt for me food. Make a nice meal so I feel a connection with you. And my soul will want to bless you. Apparently there's something to that. I want to be in the right emotional state of connection to transmit this bracha. So when you do that, I'll bless you. And it's not just I'll bless you. Tavarechacha nafshi, my soul will bless you. Right? My life will bless you before I die. Rivka hears this, she's petrified, this could be a disaster. If Esau's put next in line, he is a dangerous guy. His wives, we've already seen in the Torah, doing terrible things to their parents. He's become a hunter. There's a lot of stuff he didn't hate. He hated the concept of the spiritual responsibility of the firstborn. This is not the guy to get the blessings. She calls in Yaakov, as we know the story, and says, okay, I'm going to prepare the food. he gets all nervous, says, well, you're going to basically pretend to be Esav and you're going to go and get the brachos. My father might discover us. Don't worry, upon me will be your curse. My son, the Targum says that means I can promise you it won't happen. Others say, even if it does happen, I'll absorb it, whatever. Goes in, all right, and we know the story, gives the food, gets the bracha, but in the meantime, Yitzchak is suspicious, and he's asking questions. Who are you? I'm Esav, your firstborn. Come, let me feel you. The voice is Yaakov, the hands are Esav. And then give me the food. And then the suspicion just disappears. He starts eating the food, and he says, the smell of the clothes of my child is like the field that God blessed, which is very interesting. Like, as Rashi says, there's no worse smell than a goat hide. Like, why is that? Okay. And then he says to him, he blesses him. He gives him the bracha. And he eats this, everything like that, and then he gives him beautiful bracha, Pasuk Chavches 28. Hashem should give you the dew of the ground and the fat. So all this kind of stuff, the heavens and the earth, everything should bless you. Everyone else will turn to you. Those who curse you will be cursed. Those who bless you will be blessed. And as soon as he's finished, Esav walks in the room. Right? And he says, who are you? I'm Esav, your son. And he says, it's too bad. Not only that, he seems quite happy. Gam Baruch Yeh, the guy who came before, he should be blessed. And Esav screams and cries, says, he got no bracha left for me. He says, okay, I'll give you a bracha. And he says, and next page, Pasuk Lamatas, verse 39, he says, yeah, behold, the fats of the earth will be your dwelling place, heavens above, and al charba chatichya, you'll live by your sword. You'll have military prowess, technological advance. Your brother, you'll serve, but when your brother messes up, you'll be able to dominate him. And that was it. And Esav then says, I'm going to wait for my father to die, and I'm going to kill Yaakov. Rivka hears about it, and off they send Yaakov. In fact, he gets another bracha, and that's basically a summary of the Sedra. So there's a lot of questions that are risen because of all this. One of them is just structural, what that busy bit about Yitzchak is doing in the middle, but what's doing in Torah altogether, and why do we interrupt the story for it? Right? Even if we say there's no chronological order in Torah, the Torah is it's not always in chronological order, but it's always in conceptual order. So whether that happened then, which actually in this case it sounds like it did, or not, what's it doing, what's it there for? But also there's a moral question. We got the bracha of Yisrael through some deceit and treachery, especially because Yaakov's outstanding character trait is Titein Emes Yaakov. The Navi says that in Malachi, right? Truth to Yaakov, right? What's going on? And also, if Yaakov does trick to get the bracha, there's two things, right? There's the Akveni Zeh Parmayim, he tricks, first he gets it doesn't trick him, but he outmaneuvers Esav twice. He gets the birthright, then he gets the bracha. But also, why does Yitzchak respond so positively? Gan Baruch Yeh. He should also be blessed. Those are conceptual questions. Okay, so let's get to work. And before we get to work, I do want to point out, last week I showed you that within Chayei Sarah, within the Sedra, there's a number of hints back to Gan Eden. Mainly actually to the punishments of the Garden of Eden, death, but also the relationship between man and woman, between us and the ground, even the fact that the burial place was the burial place of Adam. There's a lot of hints back. And we began to discuss the concept of an afterlife, that Sarah's life gets a new meaning after she dies. We can suddenly see how all the elements come together to produce a lasting legacy. Okay, this week is going to take things a lot further. This week we're going to actually replay the central episode of Gan Eden. How so? Because if you think about it, the central issue of Gan Eden was you eat certain food. You have food that could bring blessing to the world, the tree of life. Food that can bring curse and death to the world, which is what got eaten. And if you notice, the brachos that Yaakov gets are the brachos that undo the curse of the Garden of Eden. Every life's going to be very difficult. No, you can have the fat of the earth, right? You can have all the pain, you can have the easy life. This is the bracha that the world's going to work for you. But just like the Garden of Eden, the question is, which food are you going to have? There's the food coming from Esav, there's the food coming from Yaakov. There's a tree of life, there's a tree of death. And in fact, Yaakov is, of course, Adam HaRishon. Because the Gemara tells us Yaakov is me'ein shufra the Adam HaRishon. Yaakov had the glow or the something of Adam himself. So he's back. Not only that, he's wearing clothes that come from where? The medrash tells us that the clothing of Esav, they taken from Nimrod, go all the way back to Adam. Which is why Yitzchak says the smell is the smell of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden had walked into the room. Adam in his clothing is back in the room. And just like the Garden of Eden story ends with, after the sin, their eyes open, this one begins with Yitzchak's eyes closing. And just like in the Garden of Eden story, counter to the Garden of Eden story, it's the woman who gets tempted and messes up. Here Rivka is going to come as the woman who gets it right and rectifies the story. And so all the elements are there. The snake is obviously Esav, who goes out to hunt in the field. And in fact, the snake in the Garden of Eden is exactly described as Nachashai Orim Mikol Chayas Hasoda, all the beasts of the field. And in fact, the Nachash's Arum has cunning, and Yaakov comes Ba'achicha b'mirma, he comes with cunning, and he undoes the cunning. And every element, you can go, there's a Zohar on it, there's people bring quoted, every element in the story is literally as a one-to-one replacement of, it's an inversion of the Garden of Eden story. In other words, this is the story that will begin the process of the rectification of the sin of the Garden of Eden. Who gets the bracha here is whose destiny it will be to carry the journey all the way back in history to the Garden of Eden. So that's just a critical piece to keep in mind as we then go through on a more straightforward level what's actually happening here. You always have to realize the Torah is always operating on multiple levels. Okay? So let's get to work. A key observation, I always point out to you that the name of a Sedra is, the Hasidic as far I'm always talking about this, right? That it's not not always, but often do, that it's not random. And the best example is the name of the Sedra Toldos. Because you could think it's just the first interesting word, but we already had a Sedra that began with the word Toldos, and that was Toldos Noach. Right? So that should have been called Toldos. And then you say we get to our Sedra, we can't call it Toldos anymore, call it Yitzchak. If you were just looking to name the Sedra after the first interesting word that comes up, this would have been called Yitzchak, and that would have been called Toldos. But obviously we realize what must be going on is that Sedra is all about Noach, and this one is not all about Yitzchak. He appears in it, but the key question this week is, what is the Toldah? What is offspring? What is continuity? What is it to take it to the next generation? That's the issue of the whole Sedra. It opens with the first opening sentence. Eila told us, Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. This is not just genetically he's the child of Avraham. Avraham created Yitzchak. Right? Once you realize it's all about Toldos, I'm not going to go into tremendous detail, you realize why it's so important that Yitzchak continues the life of Avraham. This is all about literally that. What does it take to continue? What does it take to be the next generation? What does it take to be the legacy? And you see this most powerfully in how often, another thing to look at in a Sedra, because remember, the Torah was all flowing. The Sedras are imposed by the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, right, the men of the Great Assembly, and there were different traditions how to read the Torah, but they didn't randomly divide the Torah. They divided it along thematic fault lines in the text that become units and were natural divisions. And often within one Sedra, sometimes flowing between 1 and 2, is a thematic phrase or something that keeps repeating itself all the way through. Like we saw in Vayera, the word Re'iyah, seeing, I don't know if we saw it together, but all the way through, fearing all the way through. Here, it's relationships. And this becomes, I'll show you where this becomes particularly strong, and we can see it all the way through the Sedra actually, but it becomes particularly strong the whole last section from Chamishi, let's say from chapter 27, right, page 132. Just take a look at this. Vayhi ki zaken Yitzchak, so Yitzchak's getting old, and what does he do? He calls Esav beno hagadol, his eldest son. And he says, my son, and he says, here I am, right? Okay, and then Rivka shamas, pasuk hey, verse 5, Rivka hears bedaber Yitzchak el Esav, when Yitzchak speaks to Esav, beno, his son. Why do you need to tell me it's his son? I know it's his son. We've seen him being born in the beginning. But twice in a few psukim, we've identified Esav as a son. Just say Esav. We know exactly who he is. And Esav went to bring. And Rivka, look at Pasuk Vav 6. Rivka speaks to Yaakov, Beno, her son. Why do I need to know? It's like the most incredible, and you'll see this running all the way through. Rashi comments on 1 or 2 of them, other Mefarshim on others as well. And I've heard your father speak to Esav, your brother, saying, it's amazing. You get this occasionally in the Torah, but this every single time anyone's mentioned, they're mentioned in the context of who they're related to. right? And all this goes on and on. Pasuk Ches, Ato benina, listen, my son, that I'll tell you, go to all this, go to your father. And Yaakov, Pasuk Yudalef, and Yaakov says to Rivka, his mother, behold, Esav, my brother, etc., etc. Maybe my father will feel me. You understand what? It's just all the way through. And his mother says to him, it'll be on my curse, will be on my son, and all running all the way through. And look at this, Pasuk Tasvav, Rivka took the clothes of Esav, her older son, right, and brought it to Yaakov, the younger son. Everybody's being put in context of the relationship they have until you get to amazingly enough. And again, you can do this in your homework in your own time. Right. Here we go. Right when Rivka says that Yaakov needs to run away, she discovers that Esau's planning to kill him. So look at this, Pasuk Memvav 46 on page 140. Rivka says to Yitzchak, my life could be disgusted because of these daughters of Ches. If Yaakov takes anyone here, I want him to go away, right? But one second, where's the... And then he gets the bracha of here we go. Then he gets Yitzchak calls in Yaakov, gives him the bracha of Avraham. And then Pasuk Hey, right at the end of the Sedra, in Shavi on page 142, chapter 28, Pasuk 5, Vayishach Yitzchak as Yaakov, Yitzchak sends Yaakov, and he goes to Padan Aram to Lavan, who we already know who Lavan is, but no, Lavan, son of Besuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rivka, the mother of Yaakov and Esav. It's like, what? I know who each one of these is. And look at Rashi, it's an amazing Rashi over here. Right? Rashi on that pasuk of Am Yaakov and Esav, mother of Yaakov and Esav, I give up. I don't know what this one's teaching us. Right? It's amazing. There's a few Rashis like that in the Torah. First of all, it's a good lesson to know. Even Rashi, occasionally, there was Torah that he could learn still. That's a very important lesson to know. But here it means that there's no specific message. Obviously, this is just part of a broader parsha theme, which we can discuss. But the specific message, even Rashi can't give it to you. It's amazing. Right? So this is, in other words, this is thematic. This is the issue of Toldos. Everybody's interconnection. Everybody's relationship with everybody else. Okay, so let's now get into this actual key. To really unravel all of this, a key is to work out the moment when Yitzchak is deliberating. He's not sure who to give the bracha to. He's not sure, is it Yaakov in front of him? Is it Yitzchak? But he's got to give him the bracha. And he's trying to figure it out, and there's some very strange dialogue that takes place. So let's turn to the key parsha, which is, let's say, in Perek Chav Zayin, in chapter 27, page 136 in the art scroll. It's from Psukim. Let's start from Chof Aleph, or even Chof, number 20. Yitzchak says to his son, wow, you've been so quick today. He says, Hashem, your God, made things quick for me, or made things happen for me. And Yitzchak says to Yaakov, let me feel you, my son. Are you my son Esav or not? Yaakov feels him. Now, just a few psukim before then, of course, when he walks in, I should really have said we should probably have gone back to Pasuk Yud Ches. He comes to his father, he says, who? He says, mi ata b'ni, who are you, my son? And Yaakov says, Anochi Esav bechorah, I'm Esav, your firstborn. Now, Rashi says, you should punctuate it, Anochi, I am. Existential word for self. Esav is your firstborn. It's very interesting in halacha. Does that make any difference? It's a side point, but just to be aware of. As far as the mitzvah, the halacha of midvar shakatirchak, you're not allowed to say false things. If you deliberately communicate to somebody the false impression, that is not that you're over. Lying is not just literally saying false things. It's communicating falsehood. So the justification for what Yaakov does is not punctuating the sentence in a different way. The Archas Tzadikim says, even when you're justified, and he was justified, as we'll see, he is justified, right? His mother's told him to, it's a prophecy she's received, his father's been completely deceived. It's the right thing to do, but you still should try to avoid saying false things to avoid your own moral corruption. Okay, there's many, many different approaches. I think the simplest one is that there was a title in the family called Esav the firstborn. And when Yaakov took the birthright, the bechorah, the firstborn, he took that role of Esav the firstborn. The father never knew that, but he is now, there's Esav the individual, the hunter, and there's Esav the firstborn, and that's now his title deed document. He's taken that on. That's what it meant that he took on the birthright. He's taken that responsibility, and the title document or role called Esav, your firstborn, is him. Okay, you could discuss. Either way, okay. But the point is, he says, I am now Esav the firstborn. But there's an amazing medrash. Since I just went there, there's a medrash rabbah that will say next week's Sedra, when Yaakov wakes up in the morning and it's not, and he's supposed to marry Rachel, and he's got a sister Leah, it's like, and so the medrash says that he tells her off, and he says, "You crook, the daughter of a crook." And she says, "What do you mean?" He says, "All night long when I cried Rachel, Rachel, what did you answer me? You lied to me." And she says, "And when your father said Esav, Esav, what did you say?" Like the great comeback line. But the Sasama says, no, it's a deeper line than this. And there's a beautiful Sufis Marachos that develops this. He says that what she's saying is, no, you were asking, am I your wife? That's what you really meant by your question. But when your father said Esav, Esav, there were meant to be two roles, Yaakov and Esav. You were meant to be partners, as we'll see here. But you took on both roles because your brother sinned and went off. And when you took on both roles, there were meant to be two women who were meant to marry these two men. I became your partner. Okay, so Anochi Esav b'chorecha is literally true. I'm Yaakov and I'm also Esav, your firstborn. And since the bracha you're looking for Esav b'chorecha, it's me. We can talk about that more in next week. But here the point is fine. But Kol Yaakov, he says, the voice is the voice of Aish. So Pasuk base. Yaakov comes, and he feels him. He says, Kol Yaakov, the voice is the voice of Yaakov, and the hands are the hands of Esav. What does it mean? The voice is the voice of Yaakov. So we're very familiar with beautiful chazals, beautiful midrashim that say it's the voice of learning Torah, the voice of batei medrash, batei knesses. Fine, but on a simple meaning, he said these words, and this wasn't a nevuah. And Rashi tells us. Because Rashi actually gives us two hints. He says, first of all, he just says Hashem's name, which Esav never usually did. But he doesn't say that's the Kol Yaakov. The voice of Yaakov is, Yakum na avi. Does father want to please get up to eat the food? Whereas when Esav comes in, he says, Yakum avi, get up and eat the food. It's gruff, it's harsh. It's not got the pleasantness of the word na, please. And that, obviously, if he says this is the voice... The Ramban, by the way, asked the question, he couldn't hear the difference in voices. So it could be identical twins that have the same voice. It could be he was close enough he could imitate him. Ramban says there are people who can imitate very well in the world, But, okay. But what Rashi's saying is, the way you talk sounds to me like Yaakov, not like Esav. You talk pleasantly, which must mean that Yaakov always spoke nicely, and Esav always spoke to his father harshly, and that raises a problem. Because we know that there was one mitzvah that Esav performed outstandingly, and that was, right? It says kitzai b'fiv. And according to the interpretation that it means he fed him all the time, that's mitzvah's kibbud honoring his father. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the medrash quote, says that all my life I spent honoring my father, and I never got close to 100th of what Esav did. Later in Torah, Yaakov's going to be afraid that Esav's got this merit of honoring his father. By the way, interestingly enough, this is just a side point but something to think about. Of all the midrashim, I've looked at many midrashim that quote it, almost all of them mention honoring the father. Only two mention mitzvahs kibbud of veha'yadayim. Right? Most of them don't mention the aim. If you notice in the Torah, he never speaks to his mother. He has no relationship with his mother whatsoever. It's a side point. But it's interesting. Anyway, maybe we'll touch upon that. But okay, so this is fascinating. But Esav is the one who honors his father, and Yaakov is the one who speaks nicely to him. Esav can't speak nicely to him. What does that mean? And then comes an even more fascinating medrash, the Gemara, that then he says, okay, fine, I'm going to bless you. Hagishali v'oichlem etzed b'ni, Pasuk 25, Chof Hei, come, let me eat the food, leman tavarach nafshi. He's already decided he's going to bless him. For the Kol Yaakov, he likes the fact he's got the voice of Yaakov in the hands of Esav. He comes, he eats, he brings him wine, he drinks, and then he says, come here, he writes, and he wants to kiss him. And Vayorach, and over the next page, Chof Zayin 27, he smells the scent of his garments and he blesses him. He says, see, the scent is like the field that God blessed, which I already explained to you is like the Garden of Eden, and how all of this Sedra relates back to Gan Eden. But you know what the Gemara says? What does it mean he smelled the scent of the garden and then blessed him? And of course, as Rashi says, so we could say it's Adam HaRishon's clothes, but there's such a horrible scent. And the Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's actually a medrash rabbi as well. The Gemara in Daf Lamed Zayin of Sanhedrin says, Al tikrei begadav, don't read his clothing, ela bogdav, his traitors. You see, the Torah writes words without vowels, and often in Chazal there's deeper meanings to other possible ways to vowel the words that are not the natural meaning that can reveal deeper meanings. He smelt his traitors. Like whom? Like Yosef Meshisa. Who's Yosef Meshisa? When the Romans destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, they, remember at the time, so one of the first points they managed to enter and crush in Jerusalem was the Beis HaMikdash. Where we are standing right now, Jews were still hit. They could see across the valley and they could see the Beis HaMikdash being destroyed. And then the Romans wanted to really rub salt into the wounds, into the injury, so they asked a Jewish traitor, a turncoat called Yosef Meshisa, and they wanted to, you can go into the Beis HaMikdash and pull out any treasure you want. Let's watch those Jews up there be mocked by this experience. And he goes in and he pulls out a menorah, pulls out a golden menorah. And the Romans say, that's too much. Come on, a bit of common sense. What are we going to put on the Arch of Titus if we can't bring that thing back to Rome? And then Yosef Meshisa has an amazing reaction. They said, go and take anything else. He said, I can't do it. And something happened to him. He can't go in and do it. And the Romans are getting a bit embarrassed now because everyone's watching and they can tell what's happening in the spectacles. They start trying to encourage him and they offer him tax breaks, and multi-year tax breaks. He won't do it. And then they start torturing him. And he says, woe. What he cries about is that I upset my creator. This man who was willing to betray his entire people, all the way to the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, he was willing to go in and steal the menorah. And something happens to him. After it's too late, but something happens to him. And he becomes a Kiddush Hashem and he dies sanctifying God's name. And somehow, the medrash is saying and the Gemara is saying, Yitzchak could, now smell is the most discerning sense we have, right? You could, even an object that's invisible to the eye, we can pick it up. And that means he discerned within him something about his traitors could come back, and then he gives him the bracha. Why is that the reason to give him the bracha? And how does that link to the previous bit about speaking nicely? What's going on over here? So I'm going to tell you something very profound. I'm going to show you this. I told you many things I learned in Chumash. I learned many years ago. I used to go to the Avraham shul. There used to be a rabbi there called Rabbi Weinberg, who was related to Rav Noach over here, and Zitzal, and Rabbi Chaim. And he gave these amazing shiurim, and I think this is his chiddush. He says something very profound and beautiful. He says, let's think about kibbud veha'yadayim. What is honoring parents? In every civilization on earth, I'm sure there is a concept of honoring parents. And you speak to anybody and ask them, should you honor parents? And they'll all tell you yes. And then you ask why. And in a Western world, you would probably get words like a debt of gratitude. We're indebted to them. We're grateful, right? The words go together. Indebted, a debt of gratitude. Think about a debt. How do you feel about somebody who lends you something? So on the one hand, we're very happy they lent us something, and on the other hand, there's a resentment. I feel a debt. I don't like debts. When our attitude, when we have a debt, our drive is how do we pay it off? Esav honors his father more than any human being on earth. And by the way, mitzvahs kibbud of veha'yadayim, the mitzvah of honoring parents, is different to another mitzvah in the Torah called mora of veha'yadayim, having awe of parents. The mitzvah to honor parents is a physical mitzvah, to make sure they're looked after, serve them food, drink, whatever they want, especially when they're elderly, but even when they're young. Right? That's a mitzvah to physically look after parents. There's also attitudinal mitzvahs, to have awe of parents, that we never see Esav particularly doing. Esav physically looked after his parents. Chazal tell us he served him in royal clothes. He gave in gold. He day and night was pumping food into him because he was trying to pay off the debt of life. That's what he's trying to do. So yes, it's a zechus, it's a merit, and we should learn from him how he did it. But he resents his father. Come, get up, eat already. He doesn't love his father. Yaakov has a different attitude. If you look in the Sefer Chinuch, when it talks the shorshe, the roots, the idea behind the mitzvah kibbud veha'yadayim, the Hebrew phrase is hakaras hatov. Hakaras hatov does not have even the word debt to it. Our word for gratitude is, what's hakaras hatov literally mean? Hakara means recognize the good. It's consciousness and recognition. It's not debt. There's nothing to pay back. Why? Because you can never pay your parents back. How do you pay God back? Esav was trying to pay God as well, just by the way. He's asking all the time, how do I take Misa? How do I tithe salt? He just wants to pay God, pay his father. If the price is working all his life to do it, he'll do it. Esav wants to own his life. Yaakov doesn't. You see, both of them live in the shadow of last week's Sedra, Chaye Sarah, when Sarah dies. And as we explained then, Sarah died upon internalizing the recognition that we do not own our life. Our life is a gift from God, and our life can be removed. If God says to Avraham, take away Yitzchak, and see, even according to one medrash, Yitzchak himself comes back, the Vayikra Rabbah, and is standing in front of his mother saying, I was nearly taking my life today, and she dies, kimat v'lo nishchat, because he was almost killed. But as we said last week, according to that medrash, she's not scared he's going to die. But she internalized the idea we have zero right to life. And at that moment, she stops living. And everything is now in the shadow of that recognition. If I don't have a right to life, what do I do? And that's the question to Toldos. How do I continue from that? And Esav's answer is, I'll buy my life, I'll earn it. What do I need to do to pay? I owe a debt to the previous generations. I will pay the debt, and then I will own. And that's his name, Esav, Asui. He's made, he's complete. He takes that in the wrong way, but that's what he does. He resents the past, but he wants to become independent. Yaakov, and he resents bechorah. What is firstborn? It means a responsibility to the past and to the future. I don't want past, I don't want future, I want me. I want it all and I want it now, would be the emblem of an Esav attitude. Yaakov doesn't want to buy his past. He can't. Life is a gift and it will never, ever be ours. It's like an investment. It's like somebody gives you a loan, right? If someone gives you a loan, it's theirs, it's not ours. So what is yours is what you do with it, the choices you make. But what he says, therefore, is Yaakov recognizes the past. When he looks at his father, he sees every moment of my life is yours. Every moment of my existence is given to me by my parents, given to me by their parents, given to me by the history of the world, and given to me by the creator of the world. That's not what's going to be mine. I will never own that. What is mine is the choices I make to take that one step further, to take all the effort of history, and what's mine is what I build with that, what I build upon it, the branch of the tree that I grow. And so Yaakov never resents his parents. He loves them. Yaakov's consciousness is a consciousness of the past. You ask Yaakov who he is, my mother Rivka, my father Yitzchak, my grandfather Avraham, my grandmother Sarah. Everything is in the context of relationship, which is why the whole Parshas Toldos is in relationship. And when that becomes consciousness, you are the bechorah. You are the one who takes the link between the parent and the next generation. That's what the birthright was at that stage of history. You are Esav b'charecha and you are Yaakov. And more than that, you live with the consciousness of the past. What that does is you are a Toldos. A Toldos doesn't mean I'm me. It means I'm an expression of that which came before. Trying to define what a Jew is so difficult. Because is it genetic? No, you can convert in. Oh, so it's a religion? No, even if you drop the religion, you stay. Is it it's everything. It's a sense that yourself is not rooted in the moment you began life and does not end when you hit the grave. It's a sense that you are a part of this growing tree and your identity is that. And when that's who you are, then subconsciously that filters into every future generation to the point where even somebody who tries to run as far away as they possibly can always, in the moment of trauma, when everything else is shattered, go back to that tree. And Yosef Meshisa can stand there and say, I can't do this. I can't betray God and I can't betray my people. And Yitzchak can smell within him this. There's something beyond what you can see that is so deep within you. You're the one who needs the bracha. You are Esav, you are Yaakov, you are the continuity of me. That's who he is. And Rivka was trying to be that. Am Yaakov Esav. She's the mother of both. Esav doesn't want it. She does. And that becomes the power of what is going on with the Toldos. And that explains why the very opening Sedra is, these are the Toldos of Yitzchak, son of Avraham. Avraham gave birth to Yitzchak. That's how Yitzchak perceived himself. Chazal say he even looked like him, so no one could possibly get fooled by that and think it's Avimelech or something. But the deeper point is, as the Gemara says, the two sides of the coin. And Yitzchak's entire life is this. How do I take everything my father brought into the world and make it permanent? I don't need some flashy new lifestyle that makes me stamp my identity and personality on it. No, yeah, Avraham couldn't make it. You know what Yitzchak's entire essence is? He doesn't do new things, but his father couldn't make it permanent. His father could introduce a seed into the world. Yitzchak makes the world's permanent. Yitzchak takes it another generation forward. Yitzchak fights the struggle to take, and Yaakov then goes on in a whole new direction, but growing out of Avraham and Yitzchak. And so this becomes the real message of the Akedah, really. The message of you don't own your life is, and I don't want to. I am an expression of creation. I am an expression of God. I'm an expression of Yisrael. I'm an expression of everything. And my life lives in the context of history, where it's coming from, where it's going to. And it therefore has meaning to the whole thing. My life holds the whole of the past in its hand. This moment holds the whole of the past in its hand and the whole of the future. And that's what makes me me. That's what makes me part of Yisrael. That's what makes us, and all the mitzvahs we do and all the learning and everything we do is that. Whereas fighting that is I want it all and I want it now. And that, in essence, is the battle of the Garden of Eden. Because the Nachash says, you can be God. You can be the center of reality. You can open your eyes. You can see the world through your little bubble of self, where you're the center of everything. And Adam dies in Gan Eden. Adam is now broken into many, many little growths and pieces that are you and me. And the job of history is to stop seeing ourselves as individuated things that are battling with one another, that each think they're the center of reality, and how do we bring the whole thing back together? And Yaakov is Me'ein Shufad Adam HaRishon. He expresses Adam. He comes in wearing his clothes. He comes in with that power of the recognition of how we view ourselves as the Toldos. And that at least gives us a basic structure from which we can now do more learning and fill in all the details. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help us to be zeicha to be there.